Hey everyone, this is Jeff from the B Movie Shelf. I've been not having enough time lately to really work on the blog and write reviews. Work is super busy and it's been an ongoing thing for the last couple of years really now. And when I get home from work, the last thing I want to do is sit at a computer and spend an hour or so writing out a review on a movie that I watched, the previous night that I'm already starting to forget certain aspects of, or stay up super late to get both a movie and the written review done up in the same night when I gotta go to work the next morning. But I do really enjoy sharing my thoughts on stuff, even if it's just quick, short, few sentences. That's why I'm on Letterboxd. Sometimes I might post, a review that's 3 paragraphs long. Sometimes I might only post one sentence saying, fuck this movie, or something. I just enjoy getting my thoughts out there and connecting with people on that level, even if I disagree with them, even if they disagree with me. As long as everybody's being nice to each other, I enjoy that connection. So I figured the easiest thing for me to do would be to do a podcast. I tried doing one before, and even now, I still really honestly have no idea what I'm doing. That's why this isn't really an official episode, it's just a test. I'm just using iMovie on my phone, using voice memos on my phone, combining the two together, seeing how it sounds, seeing how if it's something that's feasible for me to do. The thing is one, I don't have a mic. My only mic is my built-in laptop mic, which sounds like shit, and my phone. And the thing with that is I don't want to invest in a mic if I decide, a month down the road or 3 or 4 episodes in that this isn't something that I really want to do. So that's why I'm just doing it this way for now. But if it's something that ends up sticking and people enjoy it and it doesn't sound too bad, then yeah, I'll invest in a mic, a few months down the road, maybe around Christmas time. The thing about podcasts is that in order to really run one successfully, you need to also have your own website. I am not good at that kind of stuff. I'm not good at that stuff at all. It's like Russian to me. So I figured the easiest thing to do just for now to get some content out there, to see if this is something I'm going to like doing, I'm just doing, this kind of thing and just posting it on YouTube. I know that's not ideal. People can't download it through their podcast apps on their phones or whatever. And personally, I don't even like listening to podcasts this way. Usually I'll get the podcast version directly on my phone. But like I said, it's just something I want to try and do, just to see how I like it. Now, if I'm posting it on YouTube, ideally, I would like to do a video with it. The thing is again, the only webcam I have is either my phone or my computer's crappy one. And quite honestly, I don't like being in front of the camera. There's times, a lot of times, I just don't like the way I look on it. I'm very self-conscious about that. So I figure maybe camera's not the best way to go. So I'm just going to do audio, not going to be a lot of pictures or nothing, maybe like a couple of the movie I'm talking about at the time in the background, if that's something I feel is easy to do this way. I'm just rambling right now, trying to figure out what to say, really. How to word my thoughts. That's a big problem I got. Okay, so just to test this out, give me a little bit of wiggle room to throw some pictures up, play around with the iMovies app, play around with posting it up on YouTube and how everything sounds. I'm just going to talk very briefly about a few movies that I watched recently. The Blind Dead Saga. I got no notes in front of me. This is just off the cuff. So I'm not going to bother pronouncing anybody's names or the director's names or the original titles of these, because I don't speak Spanish very good at all, actually. And I have a hard enough time pronouncing people's names in English, much less another language. So unless I have notes in front of me that I can look off of to help me pronounce that stuff, I'm just not going to bother with that right now. This is, like I said, just a test episode, just for pretty much for me to play around with and see how to work this. So the first one is Tombs of the Blind Dead, which came out in 1972. I've actually seen this one before, but I saw the English dub version, which I thought was atrocious. The dubbing was bad. It was the American cut, which was really cut up and edited from the original Spanish version. But this time I watched the original Spanish version with English subtitles, thanks to Blue Underground's DVD collection of the 4 movies. On this one, it's about a couple of people who are traveling somewhere, and they meet up with one of the girl's friends. She gets mad because her boyfriend or not boyfriend, depending on which one of those characters are talking, is flirting with her other friend, so she leaves the train in this area that all the locals are scared of. It's these old ruins where these old Templar knights were killed and laid to rest because they were kidnapping people, virgins, cutting out their hearts back, like this is way back in the older days, like medieval times, and sacrificing them to Satan or whatever god they were worshiping in order to get immortal life. And, rumor goes that at nighttime, if there's people around, they come up out of their graves and kill them. So this is an area that everybody stays away from. So she runs and hides, just to get away from everything. And, of course, that night, the Templars rise and kill her. And then her friends start looking for her, realizing, like, hey, she's missing, she hasn't come back, we haven't heard from her. So they start looking for her. They get involved in this whole thing. There's subplots that are really not that good. Overall, I like this version of the movie a lot better, a hell of a lot better, than the nonsensical American cut of the film. I still don't think it's as good as what I've heard, but it is definitely a decent, foreign classic horror movie. The editing was a bit bad, but there is a lot of good in here. The costumes for the Templar Knights, the Blind Dead, look amazing. The score is really good. Well, catchy. I wouldn't go so far as to say really good, but it's really catchy. And, there's just a lot of really good tense scenes and stuff that makes you put you on edge. It's decent. Overall, I would probably give it a 3 out of 5, or 6 out of 10, whatever one of those scales you tend to use. And, it was pretty decent. Following on in 1973 is Return of the Blind Dead, aka Return of the Evil Dead. Now, each of these sequels are completely standalone from one another. The only aspect that's the same is the use of the Blind Dead themselves. I prefer to look at this series as more of an anthology series, where each entry is just its own separate story utilizing the Blind Dead characters. Now, this one, I feel, is a little bit better than the first movie. There's some aspects that I feel it does a lot better. For instance, it has a more coherent plot, I feel, than the first movie. In this one, the Blind Dead are pretty much have the same backstory as the first movie, except this time around, a nearby town celebrates every year their, overpowering of the Templars and doing away with them, killing them, whatever, putting them in the ground. And every year they have a celebration about that. And this year, this character resurrects the Blind Dead. They come to town and they just do away with everybody in town. They just wreak havoc. The characters, I feel, are better done in this one. They're more likable. There's just more characterizations to them. And this movie also uses the actual blind aspect of the Blind Dead better. In the first movie, there was really only one scene that I can remember off the top of my head that utilized that, whereas this movie, it plays a much bigger part. The characters have to try and, tiptoe around, because, you see, these zombie, vampiric, mummy things, they can't see, so they hunt by sound. So the characters have to try and be as quiet as they can moving around these things so that they don't get caught. And I feel this movie utilized that aspect a lot more and a lot better than the first movie did. And pretty much everything else from a writing standpoint, and even most of the acting, is just all around better in this entry than it was in the first movie. However, there are some aspects I feel that it didn't do as good as the first movie. For instance, the tension, the atmosphere, the creepy factor, it's almost non-existent in this entry, whereas I feel the first movie was really strong in all that stuff. Also, the first movie, there was almost like a subplot where one of the victims of the Blind Dead, they kind of chewed on her all over and she died from it, but then she came back to life, almost like zombie style, and this movie ignores that aspect altogether. I also feel like the music in this entry isn't nearly as memorable, and the ending of this one is not nearly as impactful, because let me tell you, I loved the ending of the first movie. I did not see it coming, and it really stuck with me. Even now, like weeks after I've seen it, I still keep picturing that ending in my head. So overall, I'd probably give this entry about the same score as the first one, even though I like it a little bit better overall. But I just feel like it also does just as much, not as good as the first one. So it has the same score overall, but for completely different reasons. Also, this entry oh, has some of the same actors playing completely different characters. And at first, I didn't clue in right away that each entry is standalone, so I was a little bit confused by that, but it didn't take me long to realize like this has nothing to do with the first one really. The third entry in the Blind Dead saga is from 1974 and is called The Ghost Galleon, or also Horror of the Zombies, depending on what version you're watching. Now, this one's plot is a little bit different from the first two. The first two take place on land and kind of have the same basic gist of a backstory, whereas this one, the Blind Dead, were shipped off on this giant pirate ship galleon thing, and, you know, given to the ocean or whatever. And this ship, all these centuries later, is still kind of mysteriously floating among the ocean, coming in and out of our dimension whenever it sees fit. And these couple of girls, models that are on the ocean doing this kind of publicity stunt for this company that sells boats, they come across this ghost galleon, go on board, and, well, you can pretty much guess what happens. So they're the people who work with them, who I guess they work for, and the friend of one of them goes looking for them on the ocean and also come across the ghost galleon, as these things happen, otherwise we wouldn't have a movie. Now, this is the one that I was looking forward to the most, because like I said, it breaks away from the formula of the first two movies and gives us something a little bit different with the plot, which I always appreciate. And two, I really, really love movies that deal with creepy, mysterious, abandoned, haunted ghost ships out in the middle of the ocean. It's one of my all-time personal favorite horror movie settings. Unfortunately, this entry was a huge step down from the first two. Like, I'll admit, the Blind Dead themselves looked great as always, except for some shots of their obviously very fake plastic hands. And I'm not sure why they switched the props they used for the hands from the first and second movies this go around to like the really cheap plastic looking ones. But other than that, the rest of the Blind Dead themselves looked really good, really good. And the set for the galleon was amazing. It was really well done. It was beautifully creepy to look at. And the mysterious fog that was always surrounding the ship definitely helped racket up the uneasiness and the creepy factor. Unfortunately, the plot is way too convoluted and messy for its own good. It takes way too long before we actually get any Blind Dead action, and when we do finally get it, we don't get very much of it. The movie is, I'd say, the shortest Blind Dead movie up to this point, but it feels so much longer, because we get so little of the actual Blind Dead themselves. And when we do, they move so slow. Like, they move slow in the first two movies, that's part of their thing, but in this one they move excruciatingly slow. And also, on top of that, the actual blind part of their name plays absolutely zero part in this movie. It's not so much as mentioned, it's not utilized in even the tiniest bit. And then on top of that, the characters are just all completely, totally despicable and unlikable. And it's hard to figure out who even the main character in this movie is, because all of them are so horribly unlikable. This was just a painful movie to sit through. And that pains me to say, because this was the one I was really looking forward to the most. So overall, I would have to give this one a 1 star out of 5. Or if you prefer the 10-star scale, then that would be 2 out of 10. Night of the Seagulls came out in 1975 and is the fourth and final movie in the Blind Dead saga, and is, at the very least, a very slight step up from the previous movie. At least this one has a pretty interesting story to it. It deals with this couple. They moved to this really small, remote seaside village. He's a new doctor in town. The old doctor's on his way out. He warns them, like, mind your own business, don't go out at night. Of course, very first things they do is go out at night to see what the fuck is going on in this town. And turns out this town, once every 7 years, for 7 consecutive nights, they sacrifice a virgin to the blind dead who rise up, like I said, once every 7 years for this week straight, for their sacrifices so that they can keep prolonging their lives. Now, of course, they get caught up in this, shit hits the fan. It's a pretty interesting entry in the series. Story-wise, I enjoyed that aspect of it. I was never bored. I never felt like the movie was pointless like the previous one. And on top of that, it has pretty likable lead characters, so at least it has that stuff going for it. Unfortunately, this movie is not made good at all. Most of the movie takes place during nighttime scenes. Except for every nighttime scene in the movie, the director used day for night shots, so even though it's supposed to be midnight, it looks no different than any bright daytime scene in the movie, which begs the question as to why even bother with having it take place at night. Not to mention, doing things this way utterly ruined any tension or atmosphere that this movie would have had. It's supposed to take place at midnight, but yet it's just as sunny as like 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a cloudless summer day. All the scare factor is just instantly gone at that. Not to mention that the blind dead themselves don't look nearly as good as what they did in the previous movies. Although, quite honestly, it's really hard to tell, since there are hardly ever any close-ups of them, with most of their shots anyway, being at a pretty fair distance, and the rare couple close-ups that we do get are mostly just stock footage from previous movies in the series, which is also the source of the only actual dark nighttime scene we get in this movie. The first 2 movies in this franchise can definitely be regarded as horror classics for fans of foreign horror cinema, but quite honestly, I would just steer clear of the second 2 movies. The fact that all 4 are written and directed by the same guy just makes it all the more boggling to me that the heavy drop in filmmaking quality between the first 2 and these 2. This one, Night of the Seagulls, I would probably give 1.5 out of 5 stars to, or 3 out of 10. Like I said, it's a slight step up from the previous one, but overall it's still not very good. Alright, that's pretty much it for my thoughts on the Blind Dead movies. Let me know in the comments below as to what you think about this idea that I'm trying to do. Give me some suggestions for things I can improve, things that you like, things you'd like to see me cover, pretty much any thoughts or comments. Also, in the description box below, you'll find ways to contact me. Feel free to add me to any of those services, message me on there, have a conversation. I'm cool with everything and anything. So, yeah, this has been definitely a learning experience, or rather it will be when I'm finished recording, and I actually try to put all of this together and get it up there and see how well that goes. So hopefully people find at least some enjoyment out of this, and yeah, I'll be chatting to everybody. Alright, bye.